The sky over Zareth was a deep violet, streaked with jagged flashes of electric light from storms that never seemed to end. Ice stretched in every direction, sharp and unforgiving, glinting under the faint light of the distant sun. Wind howled across the frozen plains with a force that could tear skin and shatter bones if anyone lingered too long. Alara staggered forward, each step a battle against the slippery surface beneath her feet. Her suit, torn and battered from the crash that had left her stranded here, offered little protection. Frost had already begun to claim her fingers and toes, making them numb and stiff, like frozen wood. Her breaths came out in harsh, painful gasps, clouding the air around her in thin, white mist. She had been walking for hours, maybe days. She had lost count. Time had no meaning in a place like this. The cold made her thoughts sluggish, her mind drifting between moments of clarity and terrifying hallucinations. At times, she thought she saw movement in the ice. Shadows that weren't really there. Shapes that vanished before she could focus on them. But deep down, she knew she couldn't stop. To pause meant certain death. Alara's suit had once been a marvel of alien technology, designed to protect against extreme temperatures and deliver just enough energy to sustain life in hostile environments. But after the crash, parts had ripped away and the insulation had failed. Now, each step was agony. Each gust of wind a sharp reminder that she was alone and vulnerable on a planet that seemed to delight in her suffering. She pressed on, dragging one foot after another, praying that her small reserves of energy would last just a little longer. Her mind raced through memories of home, a planet far warmer, where the sun bathed the cities in golden light, and the air was alive with color and motion. Those memories were painful now, reminding her of how alone she truly was. Yet they also offered a faint comfort, a reason to keep moving, to fight through the pain. Survival was instinctual. It burned deep in her DNA. Her situation grew desperate as the temperature dropped even further. Fingers and toes, already numb, began to lose all sensation. Every muscle ached. Her vision blurred, and the edges of her consciousness began to fray. For the first time, a thought crept into her mind. A terrifying, urgent thought. If she didn't act, she would die here, alone, frozen solid in the merciless cold. In that moment of desperation, she made a choice that was as extreme as the planet itself. She tore the remaining pieces of her protective clothing from her body and gathered them together. With trembling hands, she struck a spark, igniting a small flame. The fire was tiny, flickering weakly against the overwhelming wind, but it brought immediate warmth. Her frozen skin began to thaw, and her pulse, slow and lethargic, sped up as the heat spread. The fire was not a solution. It would not last long. But it was a lifeline, a defiance against the cold that sought to claim her life. She huddled close, feeling the warmth lap against her skin, allowing herself a moment to rest. As she stared into the flames, shadows danced across the ice, shapes twisting in the wind. Her mind, still fogged by exhaustion, thought she saw figures moving in the distance. She shook her head, telling herself it was a trick of light and shadow, a hallucination born of fatigue. And yet one movement caught her attention, a figure, tall and steady, cutting through the storm with a precision that defied the wind. It was a human. Alara's heart, beating erratically, skipped a moment. She had heard stories of humans, creatures of fragile appearance, soft bodies, and limited endurance compared to her own species. Yet these stories always spoke of their ability to survive, to endure, to find solutions in situations where other species would fail. Now, in the harsh reality of Zareth, she saw proof. The human moved confidently, unafraid, their armor thick and protective, insulated against the cold, energy lines glowing faintly in the violet light. For a moment, she could only stare, unsure whether to trust this stranger. Every instinct screamed caution, every nerve on edge, but the human did not hesitate or demand explanation. They extended a gloved hand toward her, a gesture of silent assistance. The warmth emanating from their suit was tangible, almost magnetic in the frozen air. Something deep in Alara's survival instinct told her that this human could save her. She took the hand, and for the first time in days felt secure. The human guided her through the storm, their movements precise and practiced. The wind threatened to knock them over, but they pressed on, navigating the ice with confidence born of experience. Alara, though weak, tried to keep pace, leaning on their strength as her own failed. She realized that she had not just encountered a rescuer, she had encountered a species that had learned how to master its environment, to turn hostility into opportunity. They arrived at a hidden shelter beneath the ice, a structure that seemed impossibly advanced for such a desolate world. The dome was carved into the frozen ground, reinforced with energy panels that shimmered faintly, creating a warm, safe interior. Alara stepped inside, blinking against the sudden comfort. The air was warm, breathable, alive with a faint hum of energy. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could feel her blood moving freely, her frozen limbs returning to life. The human, who introduced themselves as Marcus, helped her to a heated seat, offering warm fluids and energy rations. Alara accepted silently, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. Her body ached, her muscles trembling. But here, she was alive. Marcus explained the shelter's systems: temperature control, energy management, communication arrays. But Alara barely absorbed the details. She was too focused on the simple fact that she had survived, that a human had reached through the storm and saved her life. Days passed. Alara recovered slowly, learning the rhythms of the shelter and the routines Marcus had established. The human shared stories of survival, of planets even harsher than Xerath, where humans had endured and thrived despite impossible odds. Alara listened, fascinated. She began to understand that humans possessed a unique combination of adaptability, creativity, and sheer willpower. They could be fragile, yes, but they were also capable of extraordinary courage and ingenuity. Despite the shelter's warmth, Alara could not ignore the planet outside. Xerath's storms were relentless, and the ice held secrets that were far more dangerous than the cold. Sensors in the shelter picked up movement in the distance, energy signatures that did not belong to any natural phenomenon. Marcus noted it calmly, explaining that remnants of war machines, long abandoned, still patrolled the ice, scavenging for energy sources. Alara realized with a shiver that the shelter, safe though it seemed, was not entirely secure. The planet itself was a predator, and they were intruders in its frozen domain. She began to explore the shelter cautiously, learning its corridors, its emergency protocols, and the ways to augment its defenses. Marcus guided her, teaching her not just to survive, but to contribute, to think like a human in terms of strategy and adaptation. Alara felt a growing respect, a recognition that survival was not merely about endurance. It was about understanding, improvisation, and partnership. One night, while the storm outside raged with renewed fury, Alara sat by the fire she had once started with her own clothes, reflecting on her journey. The fire had been an act of desperation, a gamble against death, but it had also been a turning point. Without it, she might have succumbed to the cold before Marcus found her. Now, she understood that survival was not about solitary endurance. It was about connection, about finding allies in even the most hostile conditions. Alara's thoughts drifted to the future. She did not know how long she would remain on Xerath, or what dangers the planet still held. But one thing was certain: humans were not to be underestimated. They were fragile in appearance, but resilient in ways that defied logic. They adapted, they learned, and they persevered where others would fail. And now, with Marcus by her side, she had a chance, not just to survive, but to thrive in a place designed to kill. The storm raged on, but within the shelter, warmth and light held back the darkness. Alara knew that the challenges of Xerath were only beginning, yet for the first time in her life on this frozen world, she felt hope. The human had reached through the storm and pulled her back from death. She had learned the meaning of courage, of ingenuity, and of trust, and she knew, deep in her bones, that as long as she had humans like Marcus nearby, even the cruelest worlds could not defeat her. Outside, the wind howled, and the ice stretched endlessly. But Alara, warmed by fire and human determination, stood ready. The universe had tested her, and she had survived. And she would continue to survive, learning from those who had mastered the art of enduring the impossible. Alara's first night in the shelter had passed without incident, but sleep had been light and restless. Outside, Zareth storms raged, battering the ice plains with relentless fury. The shelter, though safe, vibrated under the force of the wind, and alarms occasionally rang when the storm's intensity triggered sensors. Alara awoke to the hum of heating panels and the soft, methodical footsteps of Marcus moving through the corridors. He carried a tray with steaming nutrient rations and warm fluids, and the faint glow from the shelter's energy panels cast long shadows on the curved walls. "Eat," Marcus said simply, setting the tray before her. His voice was calm, even gentle, yet it carried authority born from experience. Alara hesitated for a moment, still wary of her own weakness, then accepted the ration. The warmth of the food spread through her chest like sunlight, easing the tight knot of fear she carried in her stomach. "You need energy," Marcus said, as though reading her thoughts. "Zareth doesn't forgive weakness. If you want to survive here, you have to move beyond fear." Alara nodded silently, though the words felt more like a warning than encouragement. She had been raised on a world where survival was an instinct, but here, on Zareth, instincts alone were not enough. Survival required knowledge, adaptation, and, she realized, trust in others. Over the next few days, Marcus began to teach her the ways of the shelter. It was more than just a safe place. It was a carefully designed ecosystem of technology and human ingenuity. Energy panels absorbed heat from the distant sun, even through the thick ice, storing it in batteries that powered heating systems, lights, and communications. Water was extracted from underground reservoirs and purified automatically, while nutrient rations, though simple, provided all the essential elements needed to sustain life. Alara marveled at how humans had learned to build such systems. Using minimal resources to create maximum efficiency, she began to explore the corridors, carefully noting the placement of emergency systems, reinforced doors, and energy reserves. Marcus watched, offering guidance and instruction, emphasizing critical details: where to seek warmth if a panel failed, how to reroute energy to maintain life support, and how to communicate with the outside world when conditions allowed. Every lesson reinforced the truth she had already seen. The human ability to survive harsh worlds was not accidental. It was deliberate, honed by generations of adaptation and ingenuity. Alara asked questions, and Marcus answered them without hesitation. He explained how humans had colonized worlds far harsher than Zareth, using technology, strategy, and sheer willpower to overcome impossible odds. Alara listened, fascinated, realizing that humans were more than their fragile bodies. They were minds capable of turning vulnerability into strength. Yet even in this safety, danger lurked. Sensors began detecting unusual energy readings beneath the ice. At first they were faint, indistinct, and easily dismissed as natural anomalies. But as the readings grew stronger, Marcus grew cautious. He explained that remnants of old war machines, scavenger drones designed to collect energy and materials from abandoned territories, still patrolled the ice plains. Though long inactive, some had adapted, powered by hidden solar panels or geothermal heat. They were dangerous, relentless, and capable of tearing apart even the strongest shelter if they found a vulnerability. Alara felt a shiver. These machines were not living creatures, but they were predators in their own right. Unlike natural predators, they were patient, precise, and without mercy. Survival meant understanding their patterns, anticipating their movements, and outsmarting them. She began to study the readings alongside Marcus, learning to identify anomalies, track movement, and predict when and where the drones might appear. It was a mental game as much as a physical one, a challenge she had never faced before. One afternoon, as the storm outside raged with renewed intensity, Alara and Marcus worked together to reinforce the shelter's defenses. Marcus moved with confidence, placing energy dampeners, recalibrating sensors, and adjusting shields to compensate for the storm's interference. Alara followed his instructions, her fingers clumsy at first but growing more precise as she gained confidence. A partnership between human and alien formed naturally, each learning from the other, each contributing unique skills to the shared goal of survival. "You have a natural sense for energy patterns," Marcus observed, noticing how Alara anticipated the movements of the storm and the fluctuations in sensor readings. "It's useful. With practice, you'll be able to predict a drone's approach before the sensors even pick it up." Alara smiled faintly. Compliments were rare for her species, and recognition of skill even rarer. She felt a surge of pride, tempered by the awareness that pride alone would not save her here. Every day, Zareth reminded her of that. That night, the first real test came. Alarms blared suddenly, piercing the hum of the shelter's systems. Red lights flashed along the corridors, and the hum of energy panels was overtaken by a sharp, mechanical whirring that grew steadily louder. Marcus was already moving, issuing commands, checking energy flows, and activating emergency shields. Alara's heart raced, but she focused on the tasks Marcus had taught her. She followed his instructions, closing bulkhead doors, rerouting power, and monitoring sensor feeds. The drones had arrived. Their presence was unmistakable, shadowy shapes beneath the ice, their energy cores glowing faintly through the frozen ground. They were massive, constructed for strength and efficiency, with multiple appendages designed for cutting, lifting, and dismantling anything in their path. Alara's instincts screamed to flee, but she stayed, working with Marcus, relying on his calm precision to guide her actions. The battle of wits began. The drones advanced cautiously, testing the shelter's defenses, attempting to breach the shields. Marcus directed energy pulses, creating temporary disruptions in the drone's circuits. Alara analyzed their movement patterns, using her alien knowledge to predict their next actions and suggest strategic responses. Together, they created traps, false energy signatures, misdirected sensor signals, and temporary magnetic fields that confused the drones and slowed their approach. Hours passed in tense coordination. Alara felt fatigue clawing at her muscles, her mind buzzing with information, calculations, and fear. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she found herself exhilarated. This was survival, raw and immediate. Each correct move, each successful misdirection, felt like a small victory, proof that humans, and those who learned from them, could confront impossible odds and endure. By dawn, the drones had retreated, frustrated, and temporarily disabled. The shelter had survived, though not without strain. Alara collapsed into a heated seat, her body trembling from adrenaline and fatigue. Marcus sat nearby, quietly monitoring systems, his expression calm despite the chaos. "You did well," he said finally. "Better than most. You kept your mind clear under pressure. That's what counts here. Not strength alone. Strategy, foresight, adaptation. That's what survival is." Alara absorbed the words, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. Humans had survived on countless worlds, not because they were the strongest, but because they were adaptable, inventive, and willing to work together. She realized that every challenge, every near-death experience, was a lesson in ingenuity, in resilience. Over the next several days, the shelter remained a fortress against Zareth's fury, but the outside world was always a threat. Alara and Marcus ventured cautiously beyond the immediate vicinity, mapping the ice plains, noting potential hazards, and gathering materials for shelter maintenance. Each step was deliberate, each movement measured against the risk of drones, storms, and the merciless cold. During these excursions, Alara began to notice subtle details about Marcus's behavior. He observed the terrain like a predator, noting weak ice, potential wind traps, and energy flows invisible to most eyes. He repaired equipment quickly and efficiently, improvising solutions when standard procedures failed. Every action reflected a deep understanding of survival, honed through experience and necessity. Alara realized that humans were not only survivors, they were engineers of their own destiny, shaping the environment to serve life rather than surrendering to it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ice, Alara and Marcus paused atop a ridge to survey the plains. The storm had calmed temporarily, leaving the ice glittering in muted light. Alara felt a strange mixture of awe and humility. This world was harsh, unforgiving, and beautiful in its cruelty. She had faced death in the open, survived on instinct and courage, and now stood alive because of human ingenuity and determination. "You've learned quickly," Marcus said quietly. "Zoraith tests everyone, but not everyone survives. You're stronger than you realize." Alara looked at him, searching his expression. There was no arrogance, no superiority, only a calm certainty that comes from experience. She nodded, understanding that survival was not about pride or strength alone. It was about learning, adapting, and applying knowledge in moments where hesitation meant death. That night, back in the shelter, Alara lay awake, reflecting on her journey. The fire she had started with her own clothes in desperation was now a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of safety, knowledge, and partnership. Yet the lessons of Zareth were clear. Danger was constant, and survival demanded vigilance, creativity, and courage. Alara closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of rest. She would need it. The planet outside was merciless, and the drones, though repelled, would return. Storms would rage, ice would shift, and death could come at any moment. But she had learned something invaluable. Humans were not merely fragile beings. They were thinkers, planners, and fighters who had learned to conquer worlds that seemed impossible to endure. And now she was part of that legacy. When sleep finally claimed her, it was with the knowledge that she had survived the first true test of life on Zareth, and that greater challenges awaited. But with Marcus by her side, she knew she could face them, learn from them, and perhaps even thrive where most would perish. The storm outside whispered threats, but inside, hope burned quietly yet fiercely, a promise that life, ingenuity, and courage could triumph against the coldest, harshest worlds. The storm had passed for now, leaving Zoraith's frozen plains bathed in an eerie twilight. The ice stretched endlessly, glittering under the dim sunlight filtered through the violet sky. Alara stood near the edge of the shelter, her breath fogging in the frigid air. Though she had survived the first attack of the scavenger drones, she knew it was only the beginning. These machines were relentless, and Zareth would not forgive mistakes. Marcus appeared beside her, moving silently over the ice. His steps were confident, deliberate, and precise, a stark contrast to Alara's cautious, unsure movements. He carried a portable energy scanner, waving it slowly over the frozen ground. "They're still out there," he said, probably regrouping. "Drones don't give up easily, but neither do we." Alara shivered. Her fingers, though warmed inside the shelter, stiffened in the cold. Yet, despite the fear, a spark of determination grew within her. She had learned much in the past days, the ways of the shelter, the patterns of Zareth's storms, and the basics of human ingenuity. She realized now that survival was not just about reacting. It was about predicting, planning, and adapting before danger arrived. Together they began to prepare the shelter for the inevitable second attack. Marcus moved with efficiency, checking energy flows, reinforcing bulkheads, and recalibrating shields. Alara assisted, following instructions and occasionally improvising solutions of her own. Her alien instincts allowed her to sense subtle fluctuations in the energy grids, something Marcus admired silently. "You're learning faster than I expected," he said. "That skill could save us." Hours passed, and the tension grew. Outside, the ice was deceptively calm, Yet every gust of wind and every shifting shadow reminded them that Zereth's surface was a battlefield. Alara studied the horizon carefully, scanning for any sign of movement. She noticed faint tremors in the ice, small cracks forming in patterns that suggested something heavy was moving beneath. Her pulse quickened. "They're coming," she whispered. Marcus nodded, already activating the shelter's defense protocols. The drones emerged from the ice with terrifying precision. Their mechanical forms were massive, sleek, and cruelly designed for efficiency. Each had multiple appendages ending in sharp tools, and their energy cores glowed with a faint blue light, cutting through the dim twilight. They did not hesitate. They advanced deliberately, scanning the ground for energy sources and any signs of life. Marcus's voice was calm but urgent as he directed Alara. "Stay close, monitor the shields, and reroute energy when necessary. I'll handle the decoys."
Alara's heart pounded as she followed instructions.
She rerouted power to reinforce the bulkheads, monitored the energy dampeners to confuse the drones, and used her alien knowledge to anticipate their next moves. It was chaos, yet controlled chaos, a battle of wits and strategy rather than brute force. The drones struck first at the outer perimeter, their appendages tearing at the ice and shielding panels. Marcus moved with calculated precision, deploying temporary energy barriers to block their progress. Alara observed patterns in the drones' attacks, how they tested weak points, how they responded to false signals. Using this insight, she suggested creating a decoy energy pulse to draw some of them away from the shelter. Marcus approved, and together they triggered the decoy. A portion of the drones responded, following the false signal and leaving the shelter temporarily less threatened. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining drones intensified their attack, targeting weak points in the shelter's shields. Sparks flew as energy fields struggled to hold them back. Alara's hands shook as she rerouted additional power to critical systems, feeling the strain in her muscles and mind. Yet she did not falter. Survival demanded focus, and she had learned from Marcus that panic would only guarantee failure. Hours turned into a tense struggle. The drones were relentless, adapting to every trap, every decoy, and every energy manipulation. Yet human ingenuity, combined with Alara's alien perception, proved a formidable match. They created false heat signatures, redirected sensor readings, and used temporary magnetic fields to slow the drone's advance. Each maneuver bought them time, each small victory reinforcing their resolve. Alara began to notice something extraordinary about Marcus. He did not rely solely on technology. He read the environment, anticipated movements, and adapted strategies on the fly. When one drone tried a maneuver that sensors had not predicted, Marcus adjusted instantly, rerouting power and triggering a shield at just the right moment. Watching him, Alara realized that humans were not just survivors. They were masters of improvisation, capable of thinking in ways that machines could not anticipate. By the time the stormlight faded and the horizon grew darker, the drones had been repelled. Several lay disabled, their energy cores disrupted, while the rest retreated into the distant ice plains. The shelter had survived, but barely. Alara collapsed into a heated seat, trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Marcus monitored systems silently, adjusting power flows to stabilize shields and energy grids. "You did well," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "Better than most could in their first encounter. You kept calm, adapted, and contributed. That's what counts here. Not raw strength, strategy, foresight, and adaptability." Alara nodded, too exhausted to speak. She felt pride, yes, but also a deep respect for the human beside her. Marcus had not just saved her life once. He had shown her the essence of survival on Zereth. Humans thrived not because they were invincible, but because they combined intellect, courage, and creativity to overcome impossible odds. The following days were a mixture of recovery, preparation, and observation. Alara learned to anticipate the drone's movements, to notice subtle changes in the ice, and to respond to anomalies before they became threats. Marcus shared techniques for tracking, energy management, and improvisation. Each lesson reinforced the same truth. Survival was not passive. It was active, constant, and demanded both thought and action. One evening, as the storm raged again, Alara watched the horizon from a reinforced observation deck. Ice towers glimmered in the stormlight, shadows stretched unnaturally, and the wind howled with a voice that seemed almost alive. She understood now that Zareth was a teacher as much as it was a killer. Every gust, every shift of ice, every approach of a drone was a lesson in perception, patience, and adaptation. Marcus joined her, handing over a portable sensor device. "See that?" he asked, pointing to faint energy patterns beneath the ice. "Those are weak points in the drone patrol routes. We can use them, but it will require precision." Alara studied the readings, her mind racing. She suggested a sequence of energy pulses, timed to mislead the drones while allowing them to scout safely. Marcus smiled faintly. "Not bad. You're thinking like a human now." Days turned into weeks. Together, they mapped large portions of the ice plains, identified energy anomalies, and created contingency plans for potential attacks. Alara had grown stronger, not just physically but mentally. She had learned to trust herself, to anticipate threats, and to act decisively. And she had learned to trust humans, not blindly, but with the knowledge that their ingenuity and courage could turn even the most hopeless situations into survival. One night, the drones returned, more numerous and aggressive than before. Alara and Marcus prepared for another confrontation, their partnership seamless. Alara monitored energy flows, predicted movements, and adjusted strategies, while Marcus directed defenses, deployed decoys, and improvised countermeasures on the fly. The battle was intense. Drones tore at the ice and shields, forcing Alara to make rapid decisions. She rerouted power, created false heat signatures, and triggered magnetic pulses, all while keeping an eye on Marcus's actions. Each movement was coordinated, a silent understanding between alien and human forged through experience and necessity. Hours passed. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but Alara pushed forward, driven by determination and the knowledge that failure meant death. Slowly, steadily, they gained the upper hand. Drones were disabled, forced to retreat, and the shelter remained intact. When the battle ended, Alara sank into a heated seat, trembling from fatigue and adrenaline. Marcus approached, placing a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement, respect, and camaraderie. "You've done well," he said. "Not many could have held up under that pressure. You've learned more in these days than most do in months." Alara realized that she had changed. Zareth had tested her, pushed her to her limits, and shown her the power of human ingenuity. She was no longer just a survivor relying on instinct. She was an active participant, a partner capable of thinking, adapting, and acting in a harsh world. The storm outside raged, but inside the shelter, warmth and light held back the darkness. Alara knew that the challenges of Zareth were far from over. Yet she also knew that with Marcus by her side, and with the lessons she had learned, she could face whatever came next. Humans had taught her that survival was not just about enduring. It was about thinking, creating, and never giving up. For the first time, Alara felt not just relief, but empowerment. The planet outside could be brutal, the drones merciless, and death always lurking. But she had learned from the best, and she knew that together, human and alien, they could turn the impossible into the possible. As she closed her eyes that night, the storm's howl outside sounded less like a threat and more like a challenge, a test that she was ready to meet. With human ingenuity as her guide, she was no longer merely surviving. She was learning to thrive.